Welcome to the session on Azure Site Recovery, how to use Azure, Microsoft Azure as a destination for disaster recovery. I am Manoj Kumar Jain. I'm a program manager with Azure Site Recovery. I have with me Winston from product marketing and Dick from SaaS Plaza, customer, who will be co-presenting with me. We have different sections we will present. So during the session, we'll walk through the availability on demand solution from Microsoft. Then we'll go over application-aware guidance for ASR using Dynamics AX as an example. And we'll talk about generation to virtual machines. A lot of people have been interested in this capability. We're going to release it pretty quickly. And then go deeper into the network, compute, and storage considerations as you use the Azure Fabric for DR. End up towards the end with automation, and then we'll have Dick on stage talking about the service provider, service provider experience with ASR. Starting off with the availability on demand. So here's a picture that talks about the complexity a lot of customers like you face today. I wanted a quick show of hands. How many of you will have either one hypervisor and physical with multiple operating systems? One hyper. Okay, about 70 to 80%. So that's the kind of complexity we're talking about, where a lot of people have multiple hypervisors and or physical with multiple operating systems which they need to maintain, and it can be fairly complex and capital expensive. So the way Microsoft is solving this problem for you is connecting the private cloud to the public cloud with a simple few clicks, being able to protect your VMware, your Hyper-V, and your physical using the exact same solution. And how does that translate into benefits? Let's look at the availability on demand solution. Once you traditionally, replication has been thought of a way to recover in the cloud. There's a lot more you can do once you have a replicated copy. For example, you could spin up a dev test copy. You could use it for analytics. That will really unleash the power of hybrid cloud. I'll go into deep into each of these scenarios that are listed here. Those that are backed up, those that are covered by ASR, the one with the blue, the white line. I'll go deeper into each of these scenarios. The point being, with replication, you can cover more scenarios than just recovery. The first scenario, of course, is the disaster recovery. With Azure as your disaster recovery solution, you do not need to invest in a secondary data center. You can reduce your data center footprint easily. Now, I'm going to talk deeper into it, so therefore, moving on to the second scenario, creating or starting up applications in Azure is a breeze. But when you talk about existing complex applications, moving them to Azure can be a challenge. The idea with ASR is making that also a few clicks in a trusted and tried manner. Moving next, cloud bursting. The scenario I like to talk about, a lot of times you need about 256 gig memory for your peak demand, but 90% of the times 128 gig is enough. But what ends up happening is you buy the 256 gig because you do not know how to meet your peak. The recommendation is buy 128, buy the one that meets your 90th percentile or the median. And for the 256, what you could do is just burst into Azure. All you need to do is you have replicated the most recent version already in Azure. Use that, start that up for production when you know there is a peak demand, like maybe Christmas sales. And then once you're done, come back on-premise, pay as you go. So you're able to stretch your demand to Azure in a very, very simple manner using ASR. The next one, this one's resonated. I was in Australia last week talking about these AOD solution to customers in Sydney and Melbourne, and this resonated, all of these resonated a lot, but this resonated a lot more. People today do dev testing where they're either patching or they're developing applications, and they want to test it with the latest production data. Being able to stand up a copy, a test copy in an isolated network, do your dev test there, reduce your cost that you would have in case you had a dev test dedicated environment, and once you're happy with the testing, apply it on-premise. So therefore, ASR can be used for your dev test workload. Last but not the least, business insights. People run analytics on their production workload that impacts the line of business applications and impacts the production users. Instead of running it on production, run it again of a copy in Azure using your replicated copy with the latest data, take off any latency or performance issues on production. So this is a very summary slide of all the scenarios that Azure Site Recovery supports. It supports, for example, on the rightmost, on-premise to on-premise for Hyper-V. The middle one, on-premise to on-premise using VMware or for physical. The third one, between Hyper-V and Azure. We went GA for that in October. And the last one, which we VMware to physical, which we announced preview last month. So then, moving to the topic in the deep is about Azure as your DR site. The way to look at this is Azure can be used as a DR site for enterprises, for hosters, and for SMBs or branch offices. The differences, if you will notice, enterprises and hosters will have a vCenter, while your branch offices will have a vSphere. They would not have a vCenter. Similarly, on the Hyper-V side, the enterprises will have a VMM, the service provider will use a WAP stack, and your branch offices will probably have Hyper-V plain vanilla without a management head. So you can use Azure for the entire, all the segments for enterprises with branch offices or SMB. It's kind of an enterprise-grade replication and protection for your SMB scenario as well. Tomorrow, there is a session by Gaurav. He's sitting here. He's a colleague of mine, where he's going to talk about VMware to Azure. I highly recommend that because it's in preview. Not everyone can try it out. But he's going to show a demo, end-to-end demo on how to set up, do a protection, and failover. So the room number and the timing is mentioned. Please make yourself to the session to learn about VMware to Azure. I'm going to talk about the target side, Azure. Gaurav is going to cover more of how to get the end-to-end from VMware to Azure. Workload guidance. ASR is application agnostic. It works for all applications. Now, that sounds like a tall claim, I understand. Therefore, we're putting some weight behind it by working with the app vendor teams to ensure that the guidance we put out is actually certified by them. So think of it like I want to bring, no one wants to bring up virtual machines. Virtual machines are the way, are the unit of protection. But the currency of recovery, the way you want to recover, is more application. You do not want to recover virtual machines. You have 4 virtual machines, you bring them up, it doesn't help. Because if you have to keep trying, rebooting them to get to the right order, it's not helpful. We want to make sure you're able to actually bring up applications and not virtual machines. So we're putting weight behind the claim that we are doing that ASR works for all applications by doing the following. On the screen, you see most of your favorite applications. For example, you have your SharePoint, you have Exchange, you have Link, and so on, file server. The way to read this is the darker green, the green with the right side, it says supported and certified by the workload team. What that means is, for example, if I were to take the third row or the SharePoint fourth row, it means that we have come up with a recovery plan for SharePoint as a workload, and that we got it certified by the SharePoint team, that that's the right way to recover SharePoint. Same way, if you see, that's true for Dynamics AX, where Winston will be demoing that. It's not just first-party app. It's also the third-party applications. For the third-party applications, like we have listed here, Oracle, Linux, SAP, we are working with the respective app vendor team to ensure that the recommendation that we have or the guidance we have is certified by them. More will be coming. The list is definitely big, but there are a lot more. When I was in Australia, I heard request for Citrix, I heard ask for WebSphere, DB2, and so on. So more will be coming. Microsoft as a company is changing. The color of the shirt also shows to some extent, but Microsoft as a team is definitely changing. We are listening more and more to the customer. You'll hear about it in the deck, but we do want to know if there is any workload not listed there. Please do go to user voice. Almost all our investments are driven either by the user voice or by such conferences where we talk to customers and then decide the prioritization for our features. So please do, if you found a workload that's not here and you'd like to see it, go and vote for it on user voice. So file server. File server is a important workload. Now it gets easily hit by the 1 TB limit of Azure VHD. Azure allows VMs to have VHDs that are less than or equal to 1 terabyte. And if you have a huge file server or for a file share kind of a workload, it is difficult. The recommended approach, of course, is Store Simple for those workloads. And the way to look at this is you have a Store Simple appliance on premise with a 40 terabyte hot data, and a 500 terabyte is the total size. The cold data is all on Azure. Now, for Store Simple, you need a DR strategy. The DR strategy is not for the data here, but it's actually for the compute head. Once, if you had a disaster for the cold data, if your data center were to hit by a disaster, you need to make sure that you are able to access the data on Azure. How would you do that? Let's look at how it is set up on-premise. You will have a virtual machine with the attached to the Store Simple device, either through iSCSI, and then it will have its own OS. You would protect the OS using Azure Site Recovery into Azure, and then once you have, let's assume lights go off on the data center side, the way you would recover it is first you create a clone to get a virtual appliance of Store Simple. On the right side, you see a Store Simple virtual appliance in Azure. That's a clone of your blob, and then you attach it back. All of this can be automated. You can use our orchestration engine called Recovery Plan to automate this and recover your Store Simple should you have a disaster on-premise. So this is about the workload guidance, making sure that the applications that you care about come up in a robust manner, in a reliable manner, such that you can tell your compliance, you meet your compliance needs, tell your users that, hey, don't worry, I've got you. Should you have a disaster, you will be able to continue working. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Winston to take us through a specific example of this guidance using a recovery plan. Winston.
Thank you very much, Manoj. Oh, there we go. So welcome, everyone. As Manoj said, I'm Winston Haight, Senior Product Marketing Manager for AX, Dynamics AX, I should say, because we know a lot of the people in the room, and I'd like to get a quick show of hands. How many people know what Dynamics AX actually is? More hands than I thought. Okay, good. About half of you. It's enterprise resource planning. It's for upper mid-market focus. We compete a lot with SAP and with Oracle, and a lot of people don't even realize that Microsoft has a technology in that area that competes against it. So we're really excited to be able to talk to you today about it, be able to kind of give you a little background for those who don't know about AX, but then also to be able to step you through and show you what we're doing with Azure Site Recovery. So really quick, as you start to look at enterprise resource planning and what it's going to be able to cover, what it's going to help in an enterprise to be able to do, you have customer interactions. These are interactions that are happening in store, they're happening online, they're happening through a number of different channels, and you need a way to centralize and manage that. Then you have operational optimization. How are you able to come through, optimize the processes, the business processes that they're using, optimize their operations, and be able to deliver value to them quickly? And then operational efficiency. Not only can we optimize it, we need to make it efficient. So it means going back and constantly refining what's going on and giving customers the opportunity and the ability to easily go back and do that. And together, putting it all together. Now, for those who don't know, these are kind of the different verticals that we cover with Microsoft Dynamics AX. So we've got retail, manufacturing, sales, service, and marketing, procurement and sourcing, supply chain management, project accounting, financial management, business intelligence, and human capital management, or HCM. And you'll notice that retail, procurement and sourcing, supply chain, and sales, service, and marketing are all new. Those are introduced with our most recent version that was introduced 1 year ago, May 1st, called Microsoft Dynamics AX 2012 R3. The importance of R3 is it was designed from the start to run on Azure using infrastructure as a service. So currently, right now, to give you an idea of what we've done with it, we have a product called Lifecycle Services that automates the software deployment and server setup on Azure. We've done over 5,000 deployments of R3 on Azure. So one of the reasons we wanted to be here today is to talk about the workloads that we know that are there, that we have customers that not only are running on Azure, but running on-prem, and the fact that ASR is so important to them, and it's going to make it so easy for them to be able to do the recovery. This is a slide, I just built this last night because I realized a lot of you may not really understand, and it's something that I always get really excited about talking about with Dynamics. Dynamics AX is the one product in Microsoft that literally touches 26 different Microsoft technologies. So for those of you who are on the sales side, we actually leverage sales in a lot of different ways. For those on the customer or partner side, we actually are giving you a way to access the Microsoft stack through and across the entire breadth. As I joke, the only thing right now that we don't have a connection to is band. And we do have one, you'll see down the bottom right, Xbox Connect. We actually have a partner that built a solution for people on a shop floor to be able to go through and look at work orders with gestures because their hands are always so dirty. So it's a product that a lot of you may not realize how far we extend into Microsoft, but it's something we're truly excited and very proud of because of the integration that we have. So we wanted to do a quick demo of the Azure Site Recovery and just kind of wanted to give a quick rundown of what it is that you're going to be looking at. One of the things, I think it's the single DR solution. It's something that is so easy to do. It goes across not just Hyper-V, but VM, and also on-premise equipment. And it's something that is so simple to do. Instead of having to have all the extra equipment always up and running all the time, there's a very easy way you can do this where you're actually going to be moving the data at set increments that you define into VMs that are in Azure, and then allowing you to go in and at any time test it or actually bring it up live and be able to use those environments. So not only is it heterogeneous and we can work with all those different platforms, but it's a hybrid solution, allowing you to work with on-prem or on Azure. And again, as Manoj pointed out, it's also all the different workloads that we support. Or I should say, Azure Site Recovery supports, of which Dynamics AX is one of them. But again, we also know we have a lot of customers that are very interested in this and have been waiting for this. And so we're really excited to be able to bring it to you. So, and I also noticed on the bottom here, it says we're being certified to be in the first half of this year. As Manoj pointed out, we just got certified. So we're very excited about that. It's something, again, customers have been waiting, and we find that with those certifications, it's very easy to go to a customer and go, we've got everything set up, we're ready to go. And just in terms of how we actually are doing this in terms of the stack, we have a SQL backend, that's the database that runs our operations. Then we have an AOS and a client and an RDS layer, and then we have an Active Directory layer. So we're using Active Directory, obviously, for authentication. The AOS is what's actually the communication point between the user and the SQL database. So it's the application object server. So it's handling all those interactions and all those transactions for them. So we deal with the SQL availability group in terms of how we actually run the SQL. So we use SQL always on when we're running on Azure, also on-prem. And then we do the replication across those VMs for the AOS, the client, and the RDS, and everything else. So I got a little far ahead of myself. I'll back up. Let me go ahead and do the demo. So let me switch over. So what I have here is I've just gone into the main management portal for Azure. I'm actually going to come down, and I'm going to come to, where are we here? Recovery Services. So I've already got a recovery service that's been defined. And what I'm going to do is kind of come in and show the protected items that we have. So these are the sets of VMs that you're going to be putting together. And I'm just going to show you what this one is. In this sense, we just have three VMs that we're going to be backing up. It's just something we want to be able to show you. And the thing that's really important about these sets is that you can define not only the VMs that you want to back up, you can also define the dependencies that you have between the VMs. And third of all, you also can set up all the manual pieces that you may want to do in terms of how you're bringing these up, because you can also set the order in which the VMs are going to come back up, which is important to make sure, and that's part of what Manoj is talking about with the certifications. We've gone through, we work with them to say this is the way they need to be brought back up. So as you look at one of these, I can actually go down and show you, there's the properties for it. If I come back up and go into configure, we can actually show you, here's the source, the target, what the descriptions are, but then you also can get into what's the frequency that you're going to use. We also get into retain the recovery points for how many hours, and then how frequently you want the snapshots. And then the other one at the bottom is, it also is when you can tell it when you want it to start the replication. So you may do something at 3 in the afternoon, but you don't want it to start until 2 in the morning. Traffic-wise, or whatever the reason is, you've got maybe a batch processing that you're doing in the case of AX, but you're going to be able to set that as well. So with those, what we do is you then create a recovery plan. And what we do is we go through and we actually define what's the order they're going to be brought up in and what we're doing. So you can see we shut everything down, they fail over, and then the first thing we're going to do is bring up the SQL instance, as I talk about. Then we're going to bring up the AOS. Then what we're going to do is bring up the client. And then we actually have a script that we have that's going to open remote, that's going to enable remote desktop. So for those of you that saw it, Brad Anderson actually did a great demo we were super excited about of being able to use the remote desktop to actually open and interact with AX during his keynote. So there's a lot of great work that's going on right there. So what I'm actually going to do now is, since I showed you that, I'm going to come over here, and I'm coming back to the plan that I have. I'm actually going to go to test failover. So I'm going to initiate that. What I then do is assign the network, and you've got to make sure that you're using a network that is isolated because you're going to be doing testing on it. And I should also mention, too, that when we do this, we also recommend that you have Active Directory actually set up and running somewhere else just as a backup for this as well. But I'm going to select the network, and you're going to see test failover is in progress. And then what I'm going to do is come up to the jobs here. And we're going to show that it's in process. And if I click into this, you're going to actually see then the list of all the steps it's going to be going through. And it's just getting started right now. But it's going to go through the whole list and be able to show you. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to hand off back to Manoj. He's going to talk a little bit. Once the process is done, then we're going to come back on stage, and I'm going to go ahead and show you and be able to RDP into a client to show you how easy it is to bring it back up.
Thanks. Screen 5.
Yep.
Thanks, Winston.
Yep.
So Winston showed us a recovery plan. A recovery plan, like he talked about, has 3 things. One is dependency modeling, being able to decide the order in which the virtual machines will come up. The second is scripting or automation, being able to change DNS or retain IP, and being able to actually get end-to-end application working. Third is manual steps. While virtually everything is being scriptable and people are riding on the PowerShell wave, not everything can be scriptable today. There are some things that cannot be. So for that, we have manual actions. When you insert a manual action into recovery plan, execution stop there, and once you take care of your manual action, you can come back and enter your observations and say resume, and the execution will continue. So generation 2. How many of you here have generation 2 virtual machines or physical? About 40%, 40, 50%. So we've been hearing a lot of generation 2 requests. People have deployed generation 2. Let me talk about what generation 2 is. Generation 2 gives a simplified way to manage your virtual machines. For example, it has a simplified firmware support. It has an ability to boot securely so that your drivers are signed. It can boot from a SCSI VHD and so on. I'm not going to talk about it. There's a TechNet article. But currently, Azure does not support generation 2 natively. And when we ask customers that, when customers ask us that, hey, I do not want to change anything on premises. The goal, the requirement was very clear. No change on premises. I do not want to convert on-premise generation 2 or generation 1, as well as they do not want to have to come in and do any changes when there is a failover or a failback. They wanted a fairly seamless experience. So we reached out to multiple teams within Microsoft to figure this out, the kernel team, the Hyper-V team, and it was a fairly complex task. But we spent time, and we have now nailed it. In very shortly, we will go GA with the generation 2. Let me talk about how it works. So you have an unprotected generation 2 virtual machine running on-premise. What you do is you enable protection. When we enable protection, we apply an applicability check. That is, we check whether it can be brought up in Azure. Our goal is simple. Every virtual machine that you protect in Azure should be able to fail over in Azure. That's a very clear goal. We do not want you to be protecting virtual machines that cannot be brought up. For example, if you have a virtual machine with a VHD that's bigger than 1 terabyte, we do not allow you to protect it because it cannot be failed over. We do not want you to pay the cost of putting up the data there or the ASR license cost and then figure out when you fail over, it fails. So the goal is 100% failover. For that, we do some applicability check, and I'll talk about what is supported today and what will be supported in the future. Once you're protected, then you have a generation 2 virtual machine that's protected, and the virtual machine is still continuing to run on-premise. And then when you do either a failover, either the test, unplanned or planned, we do a conversion. Now, when we do a conversion, there is, I'm not going to go into the details, but when we do the conversion, we take the GBT and convert to an MBR. The conversion does require us to take a copy of the OS VHD. Therefore, the recovery time objective, RTO, which you care about, is linear to the size of the OS VHD. We recommend keeping the OS VHD size small as possible. That's recommendation from Windows as well. And then once we do the convert, we have a generation 1 running on Azure. So we have taken a generation 2 and converted it to a generation 1, but it runs, there is absolutely no impact to your application. None of your application inside get impacted by this conversion. It is seamless to you. The customer does not have to care. Failover, and then you can continue to access your workload like before. And on the way back, this was another, like I called out, they do not want their on-premises environment to be changed. On the way back, we do the conversion back to Gen 2. So we do an application check, we do a conversion, and then we do a conversion back. Let's look at some of the details around this. So what do you need to consider when you're doing this? There's an applicability check, the list is there. We do need, we do not, if you have more than 2 data disk OS volumes inside the OS volume, we do not support that. Most of the times people have 1 or at best 2, so it meets most of the needs. The OS VHD has to be less than 300 GB. That's just a restriction based on the support that we have. We will continue to expand it, but right now it's at 300 GB for the OS VHD. There's a great blog by my colleague here, Rob, who's sitting in the front row, on how to reduce your OS VHD by either removing all the non-OS volumes. A lot of times customers have non-OS volumes inside the OS VHD. Remove that into a separate VHD. Also remove page file. Removing page file has the additional benefit that unnecessary churn will not be sent into Azure. And for failover, we support all the failovers, test, planned, unplanned, no difference. Everything is on par with a Gen 1. And you can add, yes, you can add a Generation 1 and Generation 2 in the same recovery plan. So we have been trying to make sure our concepts are the same for everything we do. Tomorrow's talk, Gaurav will also show how the similar concepts have been brought to the VMware and physical world. The way you've been doing Hyper-V is how you will do VMware and physical. So that's about Generation 2. Now, let's move into, once you're into Azure, there are certain considerations you have to take care about compute, about storage, and about network. Azure has been built for a public cloud, for a high scale, for multi-tenancy. So therefore, the concepts it has are different from on-premises. It's important that you understand some of this. I will be going on some of the concepts that do need to be considered when you're doing Azure as your DR site. But on Friday, Vishal, our GPM, has a session where he talks about best practices on how to use ASR. I highly recommend that to get more across the board details. I'm going to go primarily when you're using Azure as your DR site. So for the compute, one of the things is recently, as recent as March, Azure removed the limit on the OS VHD of 127 gig. Previously, Azure would not allow, the data disk could be 1 terabyte, but the OS VHD could only be 127 G. That has been relaxed. Now the OS can also be 1 terabyte. For the previous one, the Generation 2, we still recommend keeping the OS VHD as small as possible to reduce your RTO, but for all other purposes, you can go up to 1 terabyte. Now VM sizes can be a bit tricky because the way Azure has been built to ensure it's a highly performant, highly scalable, highly reliable, it does have certain restrictions that you can get multi-NIC, but maybe the amount of disk you get is lesser, or you can get a large number of disk, but maybe single NIC. So being able to choose the VM size when you're doing enabled DR is a tricky decision. Therefore, what we do is we take your on-premise structure in terms of your storage, in terms of your number of networks, your memory and compute, and we auto-pick. We auto-select a size so that you do not have to burden yourself with the size at that time. It's a complex algorithm to choose the best matching VM size for your VM on-premise. Later, users can go and override the VM size. They could do it for two reasons. Of course, cost, if you want to reduce, when you can run in Azure in a degraded performance, or for your Christmas clouds bursting scenario, in fact, go higher up. And it can be changed anytime. You can change it whenever you need. Winston went into the VM properties in the configure tab. There's a way to actually change the VM size, and that applies from the next time onward. So once you change the size, the next failover will be with the new size. So that's about compute. Now going on to the storage. For storage, currently we use geo-replicated storage. That is, if you're protecting the East US and East US were to have an outage for some reason, let's assume the city had a power breakdown or whatever, the entire city had a blackout and Azure data center went down, then your data will be available on the West US and you can continue running from the other side. We do recommend, there is the hyperlink at the bottom has prescriptive guidance from the storage team. We do recommend spreading your virtual machines across different storage accounts to ensure that your application keeps space with the RPO, the recovery point objective you have. Plus, post failover, you will need IOPS. All that can be achieved if you have spread your virtual machines across storage accounts. Again, there is prescription that for a basic tier, you should put up to 66 highly used VHDs, and for a standard tier, go up to 40 highly used VHDs. Networking. Now I'm going to start going slightly more into the deeper end of the pool when it comes to networking. Of course, networking is probably the most complex piece when it comes to Azure because the interactions that you have with a bunch of things inside Azure, you need to consider that. And here are the factors to consider. Pre-configuration. When you fail over, you either want to retain the IP that's on-premise or at least specify the IP that you want. This is useful because you might have load balancers or firewall rules and what have you, which depend on the IP that a workload will get. So being able to specify or actually retain the IP is an important consideration. Azure announced multi-NIC support back in December, so in ASR you can choose separate subnets for each of your NIC, as well as specify the IP that the NIC will get. You can bring up a load balancer, you can pre-configure to get an internal load balancer, or bring up a load balanced endpoint. All of this can be scripted. We will have detailed guidance on networking come up in the next few weeks about how all these can be used, so do watch out for that. When you fail over, again, recovery time objective becomes critical. Azure has an Azure Traffic Manager component that you can use to ensure your recovery time objective is reduced. Post failover, you will require either a site-to-site VPN or a point-to-site VPN based on which kind of connection you're doing. If you're doing it from your site, when you're connecting into the Azure, you'll need a site-to-site. If you're doing it from your device, like a laptop or slate, what have you, you will need a point-to-site connection. That is an ability to access your workload seamlessly. Now going over to, So going over to retain IP. The retain IP choice, when I think about it, important point to note is a subnet cannot be split or stretched across Azure on-premises. A subnet can either be completely on Azure or can completely be on-premises. It cannot be partially split. Based on this, there are two choices that can happen. Either the app depends on the IP or app is not tied to the specific IP. And the implications of these are, if the app actually depends on the IP, you of course want to retain the IP when you failover. What that implies is, because of the fact that a subnet cannot be stretched, you will have to failover the complete subnet across. You cannot split the subnet, so some complete subnet has to be failover, or alternatively, which means that all apps have to be in the same subnet, or the app is its own subnet. Very unlikely. Most likely apps will share subnet. So an app that is dependent on the IP will have these constraints around it. We do recommend that if you can, make an app not tied to the specific IP. But there are applications that are tied. We do support first-class ability to retain the application IP when you failover. When the app is not tied to the specific IP, clearly the IP can be changed. Again, you can specify the IP beforehand. You can let Azure Site Recovery choose the IP, but you can also specify beforehand what IP will be given, and then clearly, of course, a partial subnet can be failed over. I'm going to show this through some illustrations to make that clearer, and again, like I talked, the apps can be failed over independently. So moving into an illustration to show this, so let's look at a place where you have three sites. You have a primary site with the 192.168.1, 2, and 3. A 10.0.1.0 on the third side, and Azure network where you have 172.16.10. Once, like I talked about, you cannot fail over a subnet, so let's assume that the routing networks will be set up this way. The 172 will point to the Azure networks from both the other two sites. Same way, 192 will point to your primary site, and the 10.0 will point to the third site. Now, how does failover work? So once you set up the recovery network, So once you set up the recovery network, you have set up a recovery network, and you said this is the place where I will fail the applications into. Now this is before failover. What happens after failover? Let's look at how these routing rules need to be changed, either through DNS changes, and which you can completely automate using our automation. What would happen is the 192.168.1.0, which is on the recovery network at the top, which is currently blacked out, which means it's not live, will go dark. So you take it out from your rules. So what if you see, the rules have been changed. It was rules were 192.168 only. Now they have become 192.168, 2 and 3. So the 1 has been removed from the 192.168. After that, what happens is then you bring up the recovery network that was darked out, now it is white, it is live, and you have a setup there where you have the site-to-site VPN. And now that has come up live, your routing rules that go into Azure, which were showing only the 172, now start showing 172 and 192.168.1.0. So in summary, 192.168.1.0 was on the primary site. It has gone into Azure. The complete subnet has failed over. Therefore, the routing rules have been changed accordingly. Now, when the site or when your application is independent of IP, let's look at how this changes. What I would have is 192.168.1.2.3, and on the other side, instead of just 172.16.1 and 2, I'll have 1, 2, and 3. So my 172.16.1 is being used for failing over 192.168. How does it work after failover? Some part of the subnet will be it won't be really removed, but think of it as not being used anymore on the primary side. No longer are applications running there which are using that IP addresses. And what happens is on the right side, on the left side, the 172.168.1 comes up live. So to summarize, if you wish to retain IP, you have to fail over the complete subnet, which means all the applications in that subnet have to fail over, or the application in its own subnet. If it's not tied to, the application is not tied to IP, you can do a partial subnet failover and bring up the application. Moving on, I talked about the fact that you can reduce your recovery time objective by using Azure Traffic Manager. There's a great talk on Friday The time and the room are listed here on best practices. In that, Vishal will go deep into how to set up a ATM and how to use it and how it works. It will show an end-to-end of how it works, how the public endpoint will be changed. So I recommend going to that particular session on Friday to not just get about ATM, but the best practices about DR. Moving on, Azure automation. So I talked about the fact that you can automate practically everything that you have. You can configure your DNS, you can add endpoints. Winston showed a way to add the remote desktop endpoint. When we bring up virtual machines in Azure, we do not open endpoints as a security best practice today. And if you needed to open the endpoint, Winston had a script which he just added to the recovery plan as a group 3 post script, and it just opened the endpoint. So when you want to use Azure automation, let's see what are the considerations. So when you're using Azure automation, of course, there's a recovery cloud, there's an Azure automation piece, and it has what we call common assets. The way to think about assets are a way to store your credentials and certificates. Assets ensure, it's a best practice to use assets for things that need encryption. Assets ensure that things are encrypted and can be reused. Plus, you will have reusable scripts. So you create scripts which in turn can be used by other scripts so that you achieve some sort of parameterization or reuse. So therefore, using this, what you would achieve, and at the bottom I have an example where the blue is a reusable script and the green is the one that is reusing the blue. So the blue one is the one that's getting a credentials using an asset, and the one in the green boxed is the one that's opening an endpoint using the asset. And you could use all of this to achieve a bunch of things. For example, you could manipulate the virtual machine and the cloud service environment to either, like I mentioned, configure DNS, open endpoint. The end goal being able to actually recover an application. The way Winston showed how Dynamics AX is recovered, you would use Azure automation to achieve that. Let's see what are the other things that you need to consider when you're talking about Azure automation. A lot of times you need to run actions inside the guest. There are times when you have a connection string you want to modify, or you want to modify an environment variable into SQL or SharePoint. For that, being able to run action inside the guest becomes important. Azure automation today does not support that directly, but you need to do a few steps to get that to work. The steps are listed here. The first thing you do is you prepare the virtual machine. You can do that on-premise for a virtual machine that's protected. You don't have to wait for it to fail over. The way you do is you install what is called a virtual machine agent, Azure virtual machine agent inside the VM, and then you install the Azure custom script extension inside the virtual machine. Post that, of course, you write your script which you're going to use. Then you deploy the script. The deployment of the script is basically you put the script inside a storage account and you attach the script to the Azure custom script extension. So you prepared it, you deployed it, then you run it. You use it by putting the script in a recovery plan. There's a blog, again, a hyperlink to the blog at the bottom on how this entire thing can be done seamlessly. Moving on, when you are using a recovery plan, you need a bunch of environment context to be able to use it. For example, what's the recovery plan that I'm working on? Again, it's because you have reusable scripts. What's the recovery plan that I'm working on? What are the groups, various groups, with the kind of, what are the VMs that are inside it? And the way the VMs are identified is using GUIDs. And which failover is it? Is it going from on-premise to Azure or Azure to on-premise? And then, of course, we do give the entire runtime context. When we run a recovery plan, when you execute a recovery plan, we figure out the cloud services that are required and create them. So we create the cloud services. So we give you the context of all the cloud services that are being created, as well as the VM role name, the VM itself, the name of the VM that's going to come up. We provide all these so that you can manipulate them to bring up the application in the right manner, in the right order, and ensure that you get application-specific recovery. So we have, like I saw, you can run scripts inside the virtual machine, or you can use this environment context to achieve manipulation of your entire recovery plan and reach a recovery. Now, I talked about that you have reusable scripts. Now, either you could create your reusable scripts or you could import them from our gallery. What we have done is we worked and got up with the top recovery actions that you need to do and created scripts inside the gallery. So what you need to do is you go to the script gallery and you can import the scripts into your account. The kind of scripts that we already have listed here, for example, we have a script that can be used to run inside a virtual machine, inside all the virtual machines of a group, to open a port like port 80. A lot of times we have an internet-facing application. Its front end needs to be the port 80 has to be opened, so we have a specific script for that. We have a script to open the remote desktop port. These scripts are already currently available. There are about 7 scripts from us, and we're continuously adding. Point to note is when you do want to see the scripts, the PowerShell at the bottom has to be checked for these scripts to appear. And again, just like I talked about the applications, if there are scripts that you want to see here, more will be coming. We will continue to add. We will also reach out to community to create recovery scripts, which we will continue to upload here. So do request your script for your favorite scenario at user voice, and we will make sure it appears here. With that, I'd like to call upon Dick to talk about the service provider cockpit.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dick van Brummen. I'm CTO. I'm probably the only guy who is running around during Ignite with a jacket with my logo on it. And as a matter of fact, 2 months ago, I stole my wedding suit out of the cupboard. And my wife said, "What are you going to do with that jacket?" And I said, "I'm going to sew my logo on the back and in the front." And she said, "Are you crazy? It's your wedding suit." So I said, "Well, as a matter of fact, I'm not only married to you, but also married to the company I work for. So that's why I always wear this suit during the conferences." Anyhow, let me proceed with telling first a little bit about SaaS Plaza as a company and where we're active. Winston I know very well because he's working in the Dynamics team, and we are an ERP cloud provider and the #1 cloud provider in the world, having offices all over the world, having NAV workloads, AX workloads everywhere through a partner channel to the end customers. And we have more than 1,500 implementations done. And then we count, for instance, for Ford Motor as being a company where we deliver dealer management software. We count that as one implementation which we have implemented there. So what do we deliver? We deliver ERP workloads in Azure as well as on private cloud, as on customer private clouds at their own premise. And we do that seamlessly in one way, and I would like to show that, and would like to make a metaphor with, say, an airplane. And does anybody know from which airplane this is? So, what do you think? It's a Boeing? It's a Dreamliner. Very, very, very good. So, it's the 787 Dreamliner. And if I would ask you a question, if I fly from Amsterdam to LA with a Dreamliner, how much time does the actual pilot fly? It's a 12-hour flight. Spot on. Exactly. The pilot flies 2 times 5 minutes. It's taking off, and he is landing the plane. But from a technology standpoint, they don't have to fly at all. But you know, it's a little stupid if you're a pilot, you're sitting in a chair, you don't have to do anything. So they're taking off and they're landing the plane. And how is that made possible? It's made possible by all kind of technology which is part of that Dreamliner. And I'm comparing the enterprise service bus SaaS Plaza is made on top of Azure, on top of private clouds. I'm comparing that with the technology in the Dreamliner. There are a lot of systems in the Dreamliner. If you talk about monitoring, if you talk about automation of tasks of somebody who is flying a plane. And so that's an interesting metaphor to see, and I'm getting very happy, and I think the audience should be very happy if you see all the technology behind availability on demand. Because that is really going to be the future in which you really can deploy services across the globe in a very time-efficient manner. So let me go a little bit more into the SaaS Plaza cockpit, we call it. And the SaaS Plaza cockpit has different kinds of technology expertise in it, and there are a lot of talent and best practices part of that implementation. And we can deliver the same kind of technology and deploy services, whether on private cloud, Azure, or on a customer on-premise cloud. And that's very powerful. Let's go a little bit further into those technologies. So if you look, we have a fully Microsoft stack. We're a Cloud OS partner, and with that fully Microsoft stack on top of that, we deliver ERP workloads across the globe. It's even the case, and probably Microsoft will never tell, but if you are having a support call as an ERP customer, the first question they're asking is, where is it running on? Is it running on Hyper-V? Is it running on a System Center environment? Or is it running on VMware? Probably the people will not be honest about this, but I can tell you that's the first actual question our customers are getting. So if you look to SCCM, which is really helping us out in automating, say, everything relating to updates and virus, antivirus. If you look to System Center Operation Manager, where we actually focus on monitoring the application which we are delivering to the end customer. And I think nowadays you're more and more getting into service enablement rather than talk about infrastructure. So the processes we are really supporting to our customers, one customer, for instance, does in-time delivery of hearts and kidneys. Just imagine that process is not working. Kidneys don't arrive at the hospital and patients can die. So it's very important to really guarantee uptime of applications at a 99.9% availability. And if something is happening, I want to have instantly availability of applications in Azure. So again, this technology enables customers, not only customers, but also application service providers like SaaS Plaza, to have a very effective DR solution in place. So let's focus a little bit more on the service bus, how we did it. We have a global service bus, and within the service bus, we have also the ASR functionality available. And second to that, we have our regions where we have the enterprise service bus also implemented. And not only on top of Azure, but also on top of the private cloud. And then next to that, what I said, the Azure implementation and, say, the private cloud, customer cloud. And so every experience a customer or a partner will have is seamlessly the same, whether it's Azure or private cloud. It's like if you look to the Cloud OS, where people say you have the same experience from an operating system point of view, whether you are in Azure, whether you're a service provider, or whether you're a customer. I think if you look to the technology on ASR, that's really what they built. So if we look to ASR, Why is this such a brilliant piece of technology for customers? And not only customers, but also service providers. So there are a couple of points. From a technology standpoint, if I look to my own, say, environment where I have 5,000 VMs running, if I am performing DR on my own, which I did, I need a data center for that. But not only that, I actually need the amount of hardware available in that data center to perform DR when it's necessary. In other words, I can never be cost efficient to do that. So a second point is I want agility. And agility comes with the ASR package. So if I am having disaster recovery and the Azure recovery portal, I am instantly able, by the push of a button, to activate my DR. Well, I must say, from a service provider standpoint, especially with so many workloads, that is sounding like the beautiful music. But the proof is in the pudding, right? So what we did, we started off in our American cloud and our APAC cloud to activate, say, ASR. And I must say that really, Manoj, I have to say that you guys have done a brilliant job in India to really get this technology up and running, but not only that, but also be able to help customers and service providers in very short life cycles to start using this technology. So from a customer point of view, the technology is even so simple that they can also do it themselves. Go from on-premise to on-premise or on-premise to Azure. And that's powerful. If you look to our enterprise service bus, we deliver a lot of other functionalities there. For instance, something probably Azure doesn't want to hear, but also cost reduction on Azure in combination with ERP workloads. So we can guarantee cost reductions when people are using our enterprise bus software. And that's very powerful. So on the application level, we really scale down and scale up. Whereas if you look to the application AX or Navision, they cannot work with web and worker role at this moment. So we can really downsize costs within that environment. So again, I think we can look further at the demo of Winston now and really see the actual simpleness and results of, say, the actions he started just earlier prior to my presentation. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Deke. So let's go ahead and go back in. Hopefully I hit the right number. There we go. So this is the screen I kicked off. You've now seen it's gone through and it's shown you every step that it's gone through. So it created the test environment, recovery plan, failover initiated. Then we went through the three groups. Remember, that was the AOS, excuse me, the SQL, the AOS, and the client. Those are the three that we had. And then we had the post step. Remember, there was that RDP step that we had in terms of the script. So it's gone through all those. If you do the math really quick, it took 14 minutes. Now, the beauty of that is keep in mind, that's spinning up the VMs. The VMs are sitting there, and you're sitting there only paying for data movement over to it and keeping the storage costs. Really, it's just the storage costs because you're moving data into Azure. So the beauty of that is you're not paying for the full compute at the same time. That's where this the cost reduction you get in this is phenomenal in terms of what you can do. To Deke's point, you do not need to have an entire data center running of disk waiting until you need to do it. It's only there on demand as you need it. So what I've done here is I'm just going to go ahead and go into my list of virtual machines I've got over here. I'm going to, actually I think I need to go to the second page here. I'm just going to go to the client. And what I'm going to do is just go ahead and, whoops. Sorry, I need to just get to the, here we go, over here. And what I'm going to do is connect. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to RDP into the environment. Got to make sure I spell administrator correctly. So what it's going to do now is the normal RDP that you're all used to seeing. It's going to go through, initiate the connection through, authenticate it, because remember we had the Azure directory piece running out there before. Then once it's going to come up, you're going to see the desktop. Just going to go ahead and initiate this. So securing the remote connection. But we all know understand what's going on. So again, you see that literally within 15 minutes of initiating this, you could be at this stage going, okay, I've now got my entire image spun up, because remember, it's spinning up 3 separate VMs, and it's in the order that we had said is prescripted, it's scripted the way it's supposed to go. We're at the desktop now. I come in, double click. I'm just going to go ahead and open up the application. So it's now officially open. So pretty excited about that. But again, you can see it's the overall simplicity of this, the scripting capabilities that ASR puts into place, the phenomenal technology they've been able to build into this in terms of, and for those of you who've been doing a lot with Azure, you understand compute's always your biggest cost. And for AX, what we see is about 1% to 2% of compute is storage. So when you can sit there and look at not having to spin this up until you need it, it becomes an extremely cost-effective solution. It's simple to set up. You set the increments of how often the data is going to be moved over to sync between where your source is and where your target is on Azure. So it really simplifies and saves a lot of money. So I'm going to go ahead and hand back over to Manoj, and he's going to go ahead and just kind of walk us through, I think maybe talk about a couple things, and then give us a summary of everything.
Thanks, Winston. So we saw a powerful demo of how AX could be failed over. I'm going to go back to and show a couple of quick things. I talked about the Azure automation scripts. I'm going to show how we actually get the scripts. So you go to App Services, go to Automation, go to your runbooks. Instead of creating, you could of course quick create, but you get it from gallery. When you say I want to get it from gallery, it lists all the scripts that are available in the gallery. If you see here at the bottom, I'm going to select PowerShell scripts, and I'm going to go to the DR scripts. I choose one of the scripts, say open remote desktop port that Winston just had. It shows me the entire runbook definition. I can view the entire script here before I go forward, so that I know that there's nothing spurious about it. I go next. I specify some of the details here. I choose an automation account, for example, Fabricam here, a dev testing 2, and I say OK. What it does is now it's imported the Azure automation script for me to use. Similarly, if I were to go, I talked about the fact that for cloud bursting, you can change the VM size. I'm going to go to maybe not touch Winston's setup. I'm going to go to another setup. And what you notice here is I'm gone into a virtual machine. I've clicked into a virtual machine that I've protected. At the bottom, you will notice there is the source and target networks. If I had multiple NICs, it would have shown me all the NICs here. I can choose which subnet to go to and specify an IP here. I talked about the cloud bursting. If I wish, I could say I want a bigger size, maybe like a D4, so that I'm running on-premise with a 1 CPU, but I'm expecting a really bonanza this time for Christmas. So I'm going to run with 8 cores in Azure. And since it's pay-as-you-go, it's pretty cheap. What Dick and Winston talked about, that you do not need to stand up a separate environment for your peak workloads. For your peak, you could directly go here. So I just demoed some of the things that I talked about, the fact that you can change the compute size, how you use your storage, the network NIC, the fact that you could specify the IP beforehand or retain the IP, multi-NIC support. I'm going to switch back over to my session. And here, I'm going to summarize now at the top of the hour, just closing. The quick summary here, VMware and physical is real. We are in preview. Gaurav is going to demonstrate an end-to-end tomorrow. Generation 2 is coming very quickly. 127G limit on OSVHD, which was one of the top blockers has been removed. We worked with the Azure team to remove that. We talked about the networking multi-NIC support that I just showed, that you can do subnet mapping and actually specify or retain the IP. We've uploaded about 7 scripts in Azure Gallery for you to use for your automation. That's all I had. We have a bunch of blogs. We have a pricing guide. We also talk about, we have detailed documentation. One of the other changes Microsoft has brought in is the product group can start directly contributing to the documentation. We have detailed documentation on all these. I do encourage all of you to go and vote for your top scenarios, top scripts, top workloads at the user voice. We will ensure that we will address them. These are the list of other sessions that we have, including some related networking sessions around network virtual appliances. There are certain free resources and the regular sweepstakes and stuff, and that's all I had. Thank you. You can use this code to evaluate the sessions. We can open up now for question and answers. Thank you. Yeah, Michael. The question is, when you fail over, can you specify multiple IP addresses for a single NIC? Good question. Today, that support is not there from Azure itself, so we do not allow you to support specify multiple IP addresses. But offline, I could understand the scenario better so that I can take it to Azure and say, here's a feature that we need. Any other questions? Yeah, if you could find a microphone near you and ask the question, that'll help. No, there's someone who raised someone raised a hand. I can't, yeah. Oh, sure, okay. How do you recommend failback? Great question. So the failback is a single gesture. I'm talking currently right now for our Hyper-V workloads, VMware, Gaurav will show. It's a single failover. Failback is a single gesture, very similar to failover. Just like you do a failover gesture to fail from on-premise to Azure, you fail back from Azure to on-premise. When you are failing back, we do 2 steps. We actually do a checksum comparison of all the changes that are in Azure and the copy you have on-premise and send only the deltas. Once we have sent the deltas across for the first checksum, then you shut down the virtual machine and we send the window, the checksum window for the time we were doing the first run and start the virtual machine. So there is, during failback, a planned downtime that you need to account for. Absolutely. The question is again, are all volumes resynchronized? Yes, the virtual machine, the way it was running in Azure when you did a failover, all the changes that you did after failover will be brought back in Azure. So it's a planned failover in some senses that there is no data loss. Whatever you are running in Azure is the one that's brought on-premise and you can continue business from here. Thank you. Yes. Sorry? So the question is, how long is the downtime when you do failback? So it really depends on your pipe and the churn that you have when you are doing the failback. So the way to think about it is, I have, let's assume, a 200 gig VHD, which I have now done a checksum comparison and finished. Let's assume that the checksum comparison and all is pretty quick, maybe because you have an express route at a high-end speed. Let's assume that takes about 20-30 minutes. Then 20-30 minutes, you have some more churn. And if you're doing it off-peak hours, the churn will be very small. Then your failback could be the shutdown could be of the order of a few minutes. It all depends on the amount of churn you have during the first window plus the pipe. Yep. Any other questions? We are available at the availability booth, and me and my colleagues will be there at the availability booth and Azure Site Recovery booth. We'd love to talk to you and engage deeper on any of the topics. Thank you.